Hello everyone, and welcome to this evening's meeting. It looks like quite a short agenda, having only two main items, but I think it might be a little bit deceptive. So, uh, with that, I'd like to welcome the Cabinet members and officers to this meeting, and start with agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence and substitutions.
Thanks, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Joe Henderson with no substitutions appointed. We've also received apologies from the Deputy Leader, Councillor Ivan Henderson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Then item 2 is minutes of the last meeting. Now I was unable to attend the last meeting on advice from the monitoring officer. However, I did watch online because there was nothing on the telly. And there was one bit I picked up on, and that was around the CCTV when it was commented that it would be operational late summer stroke autumn, which doesn't appear in the minutes. But I noticed that the leader looks like he's updated that now to, is it September?
It caught me. I thought we were just doing minutes. I wasn't quite actually ready. So if it says September in the new things, then that's what it says. But when we get to that item, we can cover it, I'm sure.
Okay. If anyone else can record, as I say, I wasn't here, so I can't really amend the minutes, but if anyone else remembers it being said as that. Does anyone? In the minutes of the last meeting, as I said, I was unable to attend, but I was watching online at the time, and a member, and I can't remember which member it was, asked about what time or when would the CCTV be fully operational for the town centre, and the response given by the officer was late summer stroke autumn. Only that doesn't appear in the minutes, so I don't know if anyone remembers that question and answer.
Chair, unfortunately I wasn't here last time. I was substituted by Councillor Bush, so I can't comment.
I do remember the comment being made, but I can't remember who actually said it from the committee. Was it not on the recording? Did we not check?
Well, yeah, it would have been on the recording. So, what do you think?
We can record in these minutes. We can record in the minutes of this meeting that you asked the question, but I'm not sure that we're getting a definite response from the committee about that, but we can record it in this part.
Okay, thanks very much. So item 3 is you're right. Can I have a proposer and seconder for approving the minutes? Graham, Bernie, thanks very much. Everybody happy with those? Okay, thank you. And then 3 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interests? No, if anything comes up during tonight, stick your hand up and we'll get it recorded. Then item 4 is questions on notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38. There are none. That's unusual. Moving to item 5, reference of Cabinet, from Cabinet A1, Annual Capital and Treasury Strategy for 2025/26, which I believe is Richard.
Yeah, so happy to take the committee through the report, introduce it if you're okay with that, Chairman. Yeah. So looking at the strategy, I think it's an annual process, and fundamentally there is 2 drivers for changes from year to year. One is anything local, but more fundamentally the change is normally driven from change to the code, so potential codes, and sit for guidance as well. Hopefully it's helpful in terms of the strategy that is attached. We have highlighted the changes in grey using italic font, so you can see that actually it's a fairly quiet year. We had some busy years in the past where we've had fallout from the issues at Thurrock and other councils where there's been changes put in place with Prudential Code just to strengthen those arrangements. We were largely unaffected because we were fairly sort of safe with a risk-averse approach anyway. So in that sense, it didn't really shift our approach to Treasury and capital investment. But as you can see, it's a fairly quiet year, dare I say it. So the changes in the financial strategy are very limited, tidying things up. If it excites anyone, the biggest change is how we treat leases in terms of them being brought onto the balance sheet. It's a very, very technical change that came in about where we have an asset and we pay an operational sort of lease payment for it. You've got to bring them out onto your balance sheet now, and it represents increased borrowing, but it's not real borrowing, it's paper borrowing. So it's a very technical change. So apart from that, it's largely a continuation from the strategy that was agreed last year. It was in place for 4 or 5 with only very limited changes. So in that sense, it's a quick run through, but it is a very quiet year in terms of changes we are putting forward or have put forward for full council to agree a couple of months ago. So that's a broad sort of introduction, but if there's any more detail, any specific area of that, then happy to take questions.
Does anyone have any questions? Peter.
Thank you, Chair. The first thing I think you said was you said that it's a risk-adverse approach. You know, we've seen councils that have a risk approach and it can go horribly wrong. So I'm not criticising that is the wrong approach, but is that officer-led or is it cabinet-led or is it a combination of both? Where has that approach come from? And have we sort of looked at any alternatives, that there's a medium approach that will bring greater returns? Obviously, which it mentions here, I think a number of times, is best value for residents. So how do you get to that decision? What's best? Thank you.
I think it's a consensus. So I'll have my view. I'd have my view about. I mean, one of the biggest things for myself, I think, is when you invest in anything, it's having that skill and knowledge. And sometimes we become a bit of jack of all trades rather than that specialist knowledge you need to deal in some of these more complicated financial instruments. And as you say, the more return, the higher the risk, and it's that appetite for that. And I'll have a different view for others, but it's very much a joint position in terms of my view, senior manager's view, and cabinet's view on that. So I think it's a consensus about that level of comfort around everyone taking that view collectively.
Ian?
Thank you. I'd just like to add on that. I think that the success we've had with the Treasury management and actually what we've always, we look at and assess what the likely return is, and we get different figures, don't we, in terms of the success of that. And I'm always very pleased to see that we always do get that higher rate. And I think so that's managing the risk. But there is also guidance, government requirements about what you can and can't invest in. So the Icelandic bank example going back a number of years, and those sorts of things. So I think we have had a very good rate of return, and dare I say it, that shows in terms of our outturn and in terms of the money we've put into Treasury management. It is a member decision in terms of that, but obviously the reason why members have professional officers is to give professional advice, and I think that whether that be the previous administration, this administration, there has been a good working relationship about understanding what the level of risk and return is, and I think we've hit a good balance because we can see the rate which we got has been well estimated, some by more and some by less. And sorry, that's just a slight smile because I'm the one who actually tends to estimate the more and push for the higher rate which we've had each time.
Peter, you want to come back?
Thank you. I understand that. In terms of the capital strategy and trying to forecast what will happen with the economy, we've seen national insurance increase, we've seen minimum wage increase, labour costs, inflation, energy, unemployment, which has a direct linkage to homelessness, which is a real concern for our sort of costs, yearly costs that we have to spend out, and who knows what else is going to happen from a national basis. So likely consider or come up with an answer. How on earth do we foresee what government will do? The other thing here I noticed in the report, and it talks about capital grant contributions, and it mentions Section 106 money, which is, you know, vital money for infrastructure and local services. And so obviously with the new local plan, with building this surge for building that's required, is there a way that, or is there a strategy that we have in terms of resourcing of the planning department, etc., where we could perhaps speed up the process for you know, planning one way or the other, so you can get that. You know, I'm in business. One of the key things for business is cash flow, and then if you can get that Section 106 money in the bank quickly after they're built, etc., then it will help the council. So has that been a consideration, and is there a strategy on that? Thank you.
I suppose my view is that the planning adhere to statutory deadlines to deal with planning applications. So in my view, that's already in the system in terms of that mechanism to actually deal with planning permissions within set timescales. So that kind of is like a national position in that sense. So is there a problem? I'm not aware of a problem, but you know, if Ian knows, you know, aware of something.
If I may, I'm going to take two parts of that, because your first part of your question was around the vagaries of planning for the budgeting. And yes, that is in there, but that's actually affects our revenue budget, not necessarily our capital strategy. And our revenue budget, because of things which we've seen increasing cost of things like the, you know, for labour costs and material costs and that sort of thing. And we've seen as therefore in projects, and you may come on to some of that later, some of those costs may increase. So that's the kind of, I think, your first one. In terms of the Section 106, one of the things we do absolutely make sure is we don't lose Section 106. So that is probably more a key in terms of what we have to do. Some authorities do lose their Section 106 because they don't spend in time or they don't plan. I think that some of the things which we've used it for, whilst we're constrained about, for example, the area in which we can use it compared to where the development is a constraint. It would also be interesting to see with the new planning proposals as to whether that's changed, whether we still get as much 106, because if the government is going to introduce planning changes whereby it's going to want to encourage quicker builds, then that may be something which may reduce. I don't know. That's just, you know, just a supposition. But also in terms of, does that also conversely give us more freedoms in the Section 106? But for your confidence, we spend our Section 106, and as a local level, you know, we obviously work with the local councillors as well as it being a council-wide funding.
Peter.
Just to continue this bit, obviously with the new rules, we don't know what they're going to do. Are they going to bring in a community levy fund, I think it is, that will transfer it away from Section 106? So how would that affect forecasts if that actually happens? And Mr. Barrett there, you know, said, you know, we you know, adhere to sort of, it's a national thing. Well, it's a national problem. I think it is. I don't think we're any better or worse than any other council, but and I take the chief executive's you know, stance that we don't lose Section 106, but I come back to my point in terms of, as a business, cash is king, cash flow is everything, and also with these Section 106, it's to provide better infrastructure. One of the things that our residents are crying out for is better infrastructure, and Section 106 money can be released for that, and so it's a matter of getting that in. So has our planning department have enough resource? You hear me say at nearly every meeting, do we have enough resource? Yes or no?
If I may, Chairman, can I just say that's not about tonight's report, though. This is a
I think Lisa wanted to come in as well.
So I think it's been explained already that that wouldn't relate to the capital strategy that's before you this evening. Also, as well, the one thing that I would add is that Section 106, when it is received, would not help the council's cash flow, I would hope, because it should be ring-fenced for the purposes for which it was received. So if you are wishing to rely on Section 106 to improve the council's cash flow, I think that might be unlawful. But let's just move on from this item because it's not relevant to the agenda item.
Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. So we say the capital strategy that is linked to the best value for residents, and taking into account that the capital programme spans a number of years and contains a mix of individual schemes. Do you view that as a problem, and how would we mitigate that problem?
Apologies, I don't quite understand.
Well, if we say the best value for residents is, which is what we're all about, isn't it? And then on the capital programme, it says it spans a number of years and contains a mix of individual schemes. So if that's going to take a time period, could change over with a changeover of local government etc., do you see then achieving best value for residents more of a problem? Is it going to become more of a problem as we move along the
So I think it's slightly conflating two things, because of course the capital programme and the annual capital strategy is about sort of what we do with our capital, as opposed to capital programme is what we're spending on there. I mean, the one benefit, if in terms of if we're holding it, we're making money on it. I mean, to be crude about it, but also in terms of spending the capital programme, of course, it is about the speed at which we can deliver projects. And actually, I think probably later in your reports in your there, that will be something you'll be discussing, because there's a number of those projects which are actually capital programme, the 60 million. But some of that, a lot of that money, of course, is not our money. It's given to us in terms of funding, grant funding, government funding under different headings, but it's given to us. So whilst we hold it, and therefore the Treasury strategy is about what we make on money which we're holding, but it doesn't relate to the speed at which we deliver capital programme, that's something I think you'll be discussing as part of the rest of your programme. So I think it's conflating the two things.
Does anyone else have any questions? Peter.
Sorry, I've got one burning question, which is about borrowing. Councils can borrow money at favourable rates and can do it sort of long term. One of the main expenditures for the council is on homelessness, and in terms of expenditure, have we looked at the intention to borrow more, to have more facilities like spendles where we can, and basically you're investing, you're building these projects, you're then reducing the costs hopefully at the other end, so it would be a cost saving, therefore of a real benefit to local residents and offering them with best value. And I'm going to sneak one more in there as well. Is any of this affected by LGR in terms of forecasts? Thank you.
If you're happy for me to respond, Chairman. I think that in terms of the wider issue around homelessness and that investment, we are looking at a number of options. I'm not going to talk about those here now, and I'd ask members on this side here not to, because there is a number of, but you're absolutely right. We know that Spendles has saved a considerable amount of money. Homelessness in terms of spot purchasing is not the best thing to do. Homelessness in terms of for those families is not the best thing to do. So for all those reasons, you're absolutely right. And to be looking at that would be absolutely right. And I'm going to apologise for Richard now, because I'm going to use an expression where he'll kick me under the table, because technically it's not right, but in actual fact it is. We do not carry debt. We do not carry external debt, I think is a better way of saying it, with the exception of our HRA. We manage, as it was recognised by the MP actually only a week or so ago, very well. Our MP actually highlighted that very point, and grateful for that, because that issue around not carrying debt and yet still delivering on things like the spendals, and therefore it reducing our commitment to our revenue budget, means that the gearing for that borrowing is even greater, because it means you're not borrowing, you're not having to pay back out your revenue the borrowing, and also get your return. You're just getting your return. So I think that's a good. If you look at the percentage in terms of what we've achieved out of that compared to what we've got, that also is a very high gearing return. So you're right. Would a second thing? Yes. Will LGR affect that? Probably, yes, because there will be issues going into the new authority where some of the things we may or may have done. However, we have been committed and asked by council to put the council in the best possible place, and looking at some of those things we will be seeking to do before 2028.
Thank you. So, does anyone else have any questions? I have a couple of questions, and I'm not sure if this is the point to ask or during the projects, but they're both linked. So I suppose now is the point to ask, and then be told, no, you need to ask it later on. The two points that have came up. The first one was around the new waste contract. When we spoke about the additional funding, which it requires between 2 and 4 million per annum that's estimated, and I asked where the money was coming from to fund that, assuming it falls into that bracket. And I know Mark said, I can't remember the exact wording, but we would find the money. Now, that's obviously a financial commitment that when I look at the books, I can't see that money in there. So the conclusion I draw is it may well come from reserves. And then on the second part is the Carnarvon Terrace, when we're going forward with that from Cabinet. And at Cabinet, I raised the fact that we're now going out to tender, and if it comes in above that 20 million, what would happen? And I think, again, Mark's approach, and it's a positive approach, was we'll find the money. My worry is, where will we find the money from? I know it sounds just looking at the future, but it is a 25-26 strategy, and they're two, so say, provisional financial commitments that we're making, and I'm thinking, where's the money coming from for those, should they go down that road?
It's a bit half and half, isn't it? As it feels like it's a question later, but as you said, with borrowing, if it's borrowing, and then it falls under this, isn't it? In that sense, I think from my position, with the waste position, it was as in the cabinet report, is that there's a mix of options you can take. I mean, some councils would sign on the dotted line a new contract and find the money later. That's always a very tricky thing to do, isn't it? Because you're committing to find headroom in your revenue budget to pay for something as you sign a dotted line. I think what the play was, the sort of words in the cabinet report was one-off funding. Now, what does one-off funding mean? It can mean reserves. It could also mean rediverting cash from other places. So it's a case of finding, once we know the figure, it's then saying, actually, can we want to afford? That's why the proposed three-year contract is, it gives us ability to actually say we can afford, we have the money in the bank on day one to pay for all 3 years. So we don't put the council into a position where it finds it can't find the savings to service the contract once it's committed to. So I think, in reality, I think to sign on a dotted line, you rely upon the use of one-off money, but during the contract, then can you find headroom within the budget to kind of release back and almost repay back some of that money you've used from one-off? I think in reality it will be a mix of those things, but until we know the figure, it's very difficult to sort of say exactly how it's going to be funded. But the report that's going to come back to Cabinet, once we do understand that figure, will actually say out exactly, itemise where that money's going to come from. But it will be a mix of one-off from the outset, I'm sure.
And if needed, is there headroom should the tenders come in for Carnarvon Terrace above the 20 million? I ask because we look at the projects we've done in the past, obviously Spendles, the Sunspot. I don't think anything when we go to the shop now turns out to be cheaper than it was last time we went there. So you can see why I'm a little bit anxious about it.
If you're happy to answer that as well, I think I asked the same question, and I think for me the milestone is that procurement exercise. Once we've got the prices again, I think it's to draw breath time and say, actually, what is the risk within that contract? Is the risk too high? Then you've got a question about what are the options to actually deliver that project. Because there's always the option, I'm a bit nuclear, there's always the option not to go ahead with the project if it's unaffordable. I think for me that's that magical milestone, is once we understand the figures from, because you can estimate anything, can't you? But you only really know the real cost when you've gone to the market and the market tells you this is the price for that. But we have got that as a key milestone, is once we understand that price, that's when I think we've got to answer those questions. Do we continue? Under what risk level do we continue? And that's the thing we've got to completely cover off when we understand those. And that would be a subject to a separate report as well. The report will come back and itemise exactly the level of how we deal with that.
One last question then. Which one comes back first? The waste contract final figure, or will it be the figure for Carnarvon Terrace?
Based on timescales, I understand a bit of waste.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of other questions, if I may. I think you said, Mr. Barrett, at the beginning, where you said that one of the strategies that's changed, or one of the big differences, is the way that we now view or handle leases. I wonder if you could just elaborate that a little bit more. Presumably it's leases on our assets. That would be interesting. And also, you know, our role is to obviously scrutinise the figures here. I think for me, I'm used to looking at P&Ls and balance sheets, quite sort of simple to understand. The information that's in here, if I'm honest, is a little bit difficult to follow. It's new to me. I don't see this kind of stuff all the time. I think perhaps, and we spoke about training before the meeting started, and I think perhaps one of the recommendations would be that we would have sort of some ongoing training as to the specifics here, what to look for, what stone to lift, what to have a look. And you know, my question I always ask is, how do we know what we don't know? If we don't know to ask the question, I think that's an important thing, and it's an important role that this committee fulfills. So any help that we get, I think, would be very, very useful. But the leases, I think that would, if you can just clarify what you said earlier. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said it was interesting, because I think it's interesting as well. Others might disagree once I've explained what it is. So it's a very technical change, really. It doesn't make any difference to the underlying council's financial position, but it's where we say we've got a £1 million asset that we're paying off on an operating lease. So we don't recognise anything on a balance sheet. No assets recognised. We just pay an annual lease. The rules change, so we have to recognise fundamentally the asset we're actually paying an operational lease on. I don't personally agree with that. I think it's kind of can be misleading. So basically what you have to do is you have to bring that asset onto our balance sheet. So that then becomes a balance sheet asset, and it's shown as debt. It's not real debt, but it's shown as debt. And our operational lease payments we're making is almost equivalent to interest and principal. So it's a very, very technical accounting change that brings operating leases onto your balance sheet. So when anyone look at your balance sheet, you can see you've got a liability of X because it's associated with a leased asset. It's a very technical side of public sector accounting. But it doesn't fundamentally change anything, because basically you remove the operational lease payment and it's replaced with a notional interest and principal. So nothing really changes in terms of what goes out the door. It's very much a paper exercise and a balance sheet position. So yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I didn't understand a word you said there. My accountant talks to me like that sometimes as well, but I'm sure that's where the training will come in. But thank you very much for trying.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions under this item? No? Okay then. Well, that's so we have a recommendation that the committee, having considered the attached report and appendices, decides whether it wishes to make any comments or recommendations to the Cabinet regarding the contents of the adopted annual capital and treasury strategy for 25-26, including prudential and treasury indicators. Do we have any recommendations to make?
I'm not making a recommendation. I hate to do it before the monitor officer jumps on me. I would just say, if I can just suggest though, sending back a thank you to the team, because this is a hugely complicated thing, as Councillor Harris has just highlighted, and which we need to go through. And the point about actually they're very different to public sector account, private sector account, you're absolutely right. So I just think that and the amount of money which actually gets the return helps our revenue budget and gives us support. So I just sort of make a suggestion that perhaps it's very useful for just to feeding back to the team your thanks to them for what they're doing, which is then facilitating the work of the council.
No, I would just say somewhere
Okay, Graham.
somewhere along the line, because obviously Peter has made some good comments, and obviously the good comments from the officers as well, and maybe we can make a correlation between what Peter has suggested and what obviously the officers and the chief executive have said. So somewhere along the line, can we mention that, I wouldn't say we're going to go back to school, but maybe we can have a session and maybe dig a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. So
just one item, just a standalone item.
Yeah. So what we're looking for is some form of would you call it training or an in-depth pre-meeting before next year's? How would you like to?
I think it's whatever it takes really to give us a sort of an overview. I don't expect to be trained into an accountant. It takes many years to do that. But I think just having a more in-depth oversight to actually look at the figures and a brief understanding. I'm sure we can arrange that training internally. I think it would just be helpful to understand and Mr. Barrett has mentioned that the council do have a balance sheet, so I would question why we haven't got sight of the balance sheet then. And maybe that's something that could be suggested and proposed next time. And I'd like to just concur with our chief executive, and if no one else is going to do it, I'll propose our thanks to the accounting team for their diligent work in presenting these figures for the committee. Thank you.
We've got enough there to formulate.
So include in the recommendation that the committee felt it would be beneficial before considering this item again in the future to be provided with a detailed briefing beforehand, and also to thank the accountancy team in finance for the work that they put into the treasury management strategy.
Plus, I did mention about the balance sheet. Is there a reason why it's not there, or is it something that we would see then?
Yeah, so it's publicly available. It's an audit committee. It goes through the audit committee. So there's no reason why. I mean, it's on a website. We can share that. Basically, it's part of the statement of accounts. That's equally as complicated if you look at that. So with the balance sheet, there's just notes down the side. There's just a note to explain everything. So it's equally as complicated, but it's a good read. It's a good read. So in that sense, to save you trying to find it on a website, we can ping that out to you so you can get a copy of the accounts, and I'll tell you which page the balance sheet's on. So absolutely fine.
Okay. With that addition, are we, Graham?
Yeah, just a suggestion then. So Richard mentioned the audit committee. Could we do a joint? Because I'm on the audit committee as well. Could we do like a joint one? And ideally, I know time goes so quick, but we've got our January meeting, budget meeting. So ideally, it would be nice to do something by maybe October, November, so we could then really put us on the button when we come to do our thumb screws. Yeah, thumb screws.
Are we happy with that?
I'm very happy and excited to see the site of the balance sheet. Thank you.
Yes. Looking forward to it. Okay then, can I have a proposer for that then, please? And a seconder? And we all happy with that? Excellent. So that's item 5. Now move on to item 6, which is a report of the leader of the council, update on corporate projects, which apparently has been given by you, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'll keep my introduction brief. I think there's quite a few things people want to go through on there. Firstly, my apologies for the first meeting we tried to arrange for this. I had something unavoidable that I had to deal with, and then the second one coincided with the Local Government Association conference, so we couldn't do that. So thank you for accommodating us today. In front of you, you have Appendix B. That lists the current projects in its entirety. I'm hoping we've picked up everything there. And I'm just quite happy to take questions. I wasn't proposing to go through each individual project one by one, but just take questions and comments from the committee with possibly a summary at the end. Thank you.
Okay, so Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. It's a really good report, and there's a lot of detail in there. There's a few last-minute amendments, which was a bit disappointing, but we've had a chance for an hour or so earlier this evening to look at those amendments. The only thing that sort of jumped out at me really was the Carnarvon Terrace, and I may be missing the mark completely here. It's a huge project, and given LGR, we don't have that long to deliver it. Now, we haven't got the tenders in. We don't know how much it's going to cost. We've got a big plot of land sitting there that's deteriorating, and looks like it's a welcome site for anyone that wants to throw some stones around the area. Even the sign announcing what's going to be done is aged and broken, deteriorating. And I just wonder, are we shooting beyond what we can do in the given timescales? It's an obvious question. I'm sure it's one the Cabinet's considered, but given the size of the budget, I just wonder if we're trying to stretch ourselves too far.
Are we trying to stretch ourselves too far? £19.6 million. Yes, it's the biggest council project that we've got going. I think, no, we're not. I think, I'm trying to remember when we did it, we put £1 million into a project delivery unit, which are delivering that and the what's called CRP2 to us, but I can't remember the proper name for it, which is the previous government's money around the other £20 million, the 14 projects. So yes, I'll give you the site looks shabby, and yes, we haven't done the tenders. But if you look at the way it's laid out, you know, it doesn't seem to be falling behind. We get updated on it quite regularly. In fact, we've got another update in 5 days' time, you know, as to see where not just that, but all projects are going. So Cabinet is well sighted on where we are, and as has already been discussed, there's always an element of risk with everything. But until that tender comes in and we know what the price is, then we won't know how or whether we proceed, whether how to mitigate it, all those sort of things that come in with projects that have a price tag on them that possibly you didn't expect. So it's just one of those things. But yes, I think it's not beyond us by a long way.
Thank you for that reply. It looks an exciting project, and if we can do it in time, I don't think anyone round this table would say it's the wrong project. So we look forward to seeing it.
Graham.
Just talking about that, and I can remember we had a really good presentation here concerning the spindles issue, concerning the project development unit, and I wonder whether we could have an update on that, not necessarily tonight, but sometime, just to see. I think one of the objectives was for the portfolio holders to spend more time with the officers, and I just wonder whether we could have an update on that, because as Matthew just said, there's some big, obviously, and as you just said, there's some big meaty items going on there. So that'd be quite nice to have a little update on the project delivery.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's nothing to hide. I think, but if we're just going to do an update, why don't we do it for all members rather than just this committee? You know, and we can put it in an all-member briefing. That's probably the better way of going forward with that, so that everybody can see what's going on, and you know, nobody's asking what's going on. It's just the 14 of us in this room that know what's going on. So yeah, I think I'll speak to officers and we'll get it in an all-member briefing as soon as possible.
Okay. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Steady's mentioned spindles, I just wanted to mention that as well then. Obviously there was, I think it's well documented, and we had a presentation from the Chief Executive on that, but there were obviously some concerns with the projects and the overspend, and I think that you know we need to sort of have reassurance, and the residents need to have reassurance that that kind of thing won't happen again. And I think I'm going back to not just the overspend, but also the original specification, because that I think was probably found wanting at that point. So in terms of the projects, Carnarvon House, which has been mentioned, big projects. How can we be reassured that that kind of issue will not happen again? And what due diligence is in place now to make sure that there are no sort of unexpected costs that should have been found in the first place. And then in terms of communication, if there are issues and extra expenditure, what's the process now in terms of alerting the portfolio holder and subsequently cabinet? What's the process now, and what was the process then? So what changes have been put in place to ensure that that there aren't those same issues? Thank you.
So, from a process point of view, the process is quite good in the first place. Yeah, we thought about this a long time. Yeah. So, if you have a red light and you drive through it, the process is right. You just ignore the process. And that's kind of where the problem was, with the overspend. So I think generally we have a much better oversight. The reports are better. We have a project delivery unit, which now individual projects have what's called a PID. Is it PID? Project, yeah. Which is an initiation document which basically covers all the bits that we need to make sure we've got the right governance, we've got the right finance in place, and all the decisions are in the right places where they should be, and everybody understands what they're doing. Plus, most projects, if not all projects, depending on the size of them, have got a project lead. So I think we've done everything we can do, and I think for the base of most of the projects, they're very sound now, and that's one of the things we keep checking on. And ever since we've had this, it's like, how are we doing with that? How are we doing with that? How are we doing with that? The document in front of you shows how up to date we are. I mean, Councillor Ben-Sillam talked about, there's been a few updates. Well, there's been a few updates since we gave it to you. There's planning decisions that have gone through only last night. So it's an ever-moving feast of bits and pieces. But the fact that you got the level of detail that you have shows that we are on top of it. And that's the assurance I can give you, I think.
Just to add to that, I'm not going to go into, as I said on my previous feedback, I'm not going to go into it either this time. But when an officer makes a significant error, there are procedures and process which also we have, which we have gone through, and there have been ramifications as a result of that. That's all I'm going to say in that. And it picks up Councillor Steady's point about how do you know that it's going to? Well, actually, sending out, as I said in my previous report, the direction to staff, the direction to managers when they get it wrong, but also having the review and having the subsequent HR inquiry as to what happened and were there any disciplinary. We have dealt with that, which sends out a message. So, as Councillor, as you are confident to say, is that there is a governance in place. Then, as the leader said, but people have to follow it. And when they don't, people need to know that there are ramifications for not following it. So, and we have picked that up. So that's the other end of the assurance for you is that we have picked that up, and there have been outcomes as a result of that.
Peter.
Chair, I don't think I've ever been or ever heard what was the actual amount. I think it was 360,000 or something, 380,000 or whatever the actual amount was. But what was it that actually made that 380,000 up? What was the thing? You know, was it stuff that wasn't picked up on the original specification? But what was it?
Chairman, can I just say, we did that at the previous one where I went through in great detail about what made it up, what was the point. If I refer you back to the report, which was on, and I sat here for quite a while going through all of that as to what made that up and what was the conclusion. I think your point tonight is a very valid one, is how do we make sure that any future project is properly scoped. I think that one of the things which I readily said at the last meeting was it wasn't as well scoped as it should have been. However, having the project unit which we've brought in is making sure that things like, you're quite right to raise about the £20 million and a total of £60 million, the different schemes, is properly scoped and has that team there to support it is really important. But I think you're going back. I haven't got the report in front of me, but I went right through that report with you last time.
Chair, if I may. I mean, I remember talking about the fire doors, and I think you said that you authorised them, but I don't recall ever seeing a report. So maybe if we haven't got it in front of us now, that perhaps just for my own benefit, is that somebody could send me a note of what that makeup was of that cost.
If I can offer to send Councillor Harris the report from the previous meeting, and if he then has any questions for me, because I presented it, I'm very happy to have a conversation with him separately.
Thank you. And one more point. I think it was Councillor Steady mentioned the process unit, development unit. There are some projects here where it seems that they are overseeing, and there are some projects that they're not overseeing. So what is the criteria where the process development unit actually kicks in and they oversee it or get involved? Thank you.
Primarily, the project delivery unit starts with the, as Ian has said, the £60 million worth of projects that have been funded by MHCLG underpinning it. So that's like the Levelling Up Fund, like the Capital Regeneration projects, like the Capital Regeneration Partnership projects. So those are the primary ones which the project delivery unit oversees.
Would the spendles, forgive me, Chair, sorry, would the spendles have fallen in that? Would it have been captured by this development unit had they been in place at that point?
It's impossible to look back and say what would we have done with the project had we had that in place, because you make decisions on putting in place the capacity to deliver major schemes at the time. Would we have done? Possibly, but I can't say that we would have done, simply because that's not what we had in place at that time.
But I'm just trying to see, is there anything that could fall outside, you know, what Mr. Healy has mentioned? If there's any projects that are going to come forward, might be £500,000, £1 million that falls outside that, funded by the council, for instance, that, you know, can still, you know, get, you know, potentially out of control or overspend or whatever. But, you know, would that be looked at as well? How will those projects be
And it's a very
looked
good
at?
point, because it's about capacity. We have made sure that we have stated that the team is not just an economic growth team, it is actually a corporate capacity. And indeed, I know only a week or so ago, Damien Williams has called on them to look at a project which they're going through. So it is not exclusively the economic growth. It did stimulate as a result of the £60 million and as a result of the learning from Spendles as to why we put it in place. So could I say, is there every project will go through, or is there a particular level? No, but there again, sometimes projects may cost less but be more risky, or they may be cost more but be easier. So it's a judgment call each time as to who is actually going to manage the project. But the key thing is we have got that capacity to be able to apply, which we didn't have before.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there is potential risk there, I think. I know what you're saying, it's a judgment view, but there is potential risk there. We've got this new unit that's going to look after the bigger funded projects, but I know, open to debate, see what, you know, any of my colleagues think on that as well.
Can I just say, you're absolutely right, Councillor Harris. There is potential risk, because there's always potential risks when you're doing big projects. Councillor Steady said about, you know, what potentially increasing costs and everything else. And of course, you know, we couldn't have foretold COVID and what that did with costs, as we know. We couldn't have foretold, you know, the various difference in terms of the impact on the banking rates and all that sort of thing. So there's various, I don't want to get into the politics there. There's various different impacts which you can't foretell, and we can only mitigate that by putting that capacity in place. But you're right, there is a risk. What I am going to say, though, is I am proud of is if you look at what we have here, we have a council who's not afraid to try and do these things, and I mean the previous administration who brought some of this in, and the existing administration going through it as well, is not afraid to do that. And I think the worst thing we could be is a council who says we've taken no risks, we've got no losses, and we've done nothing, and we're not that. But your surety is actually what Richard Barrett said before, is we manage our actual money very well. And actually, if you look at the comparisons going through LGR, who's in a strong financial position going into this, it's tendering.
So I accept what you say, Mr. Davison, but we've got you know, two portfolio holders here this evening for assets and for planning and for housing, etc. I mean, you know, is there anything that you gentlemen would add to that to perhaps give more reassurance in terms of, because you know these are likely to be under your portfolio, in terms of making sure that, you know, the kind of issues won't happen again, and you guys are in direct communication. Thank you.
I'll just be very brief and say that every time I meet with my officers around issues within my portfolio, one of the first questions I ask them is about risk and how we mitigate risk. And I think that's a standing item every time I meet with my officers, because that's the one thing that the one thing that we can do as we go through projects is lessen the chance of risk, minimise risk by asking those questions. And if you don't answer those questions, then you can't minimise risk. And I think that's what I do with my officers when I meet them, is ask them the questions around those risks, so that I've got the knowledge to make decisions so you can mitigate against those risks.
Andy, if obviously you asked, I think Councillor Steady may have asked, or it was mentioned, and Mr. Davison responded that we look at all options with regard to, somebody mentioned, do we do another Spendles? If we do, would we do it differently? I don't know. But from a personal perspective, I would be asking some very, very searching questions at the very beginning to make sure that we've got everything right. And I think that's what we've learned from Spendles. You know, the review's been done, we've had reports, we've seen where the mistakes have been made, I think, and we've learned from those. So going forward, if we ever do that again, I'm not saying we will or we won't, but if we ever do something similar, then, you know, the learning from what went before will be part of any questions or any discussions that I have.
And like Councillor Cox has said, you know, I have meetings with officers every week. And with regard to projects, it's where are we with it? What's happening? I want the detail. Sometimes too much detail, I'm told, but sometimes you need to have that detail to be able to make an informed decision if you have to, or an informed view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, lessons learned. I think that's the thing, and it's reassurance. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Mark.
Thank you, Chairman. Just the conversation you had on my portfolio, I wasn't allowed to be a part of, so I'm going to jump in anyway. Every project has risks, and I think it's the mitigation of that. You talk about the LUF. I mean, that's been shared with members through all member briefings. There's risk tables in there and everything else. But I think part of me sits there and says, if you don't take any risks, then as the Chief Exec said, you'll do nothing. And then you've only got to sit there and look at, the sunspot. It's in there, fully at capacity. Started by the previous administration, finished by us. It's award-winning. Got Honeycroft under budget, delivered under time. That's a success. But we don't talk about that one because that one wasn't over. And then you've got Spendles. Would we do it? Of course we would do it. It's had 58 families through it so far. It's only got 31 rooms. So it tells you that 27 families minimum have gone through there. And not only have they gone through, but they're now having their own home and everything else. I'm very proud of that. And all of that takes some risk. And if you say, would you do it again? Yes, in a dry heartbeat. Risk is part of it. It's how you mitigate it. And I will sit here and say to the cows come home, I've got some excellent officers in this council. You all know it. And I have utmost confidence. And occasionally it goes wrong through, nobody can see it coming. The best system in the world, you won't see it coming. And we have to deal with the fallout. And fair play to my officers. They've done a great job in doing that. So yeah, I think risk is part of it, but I don't think we need to make it the enemy. Otherwise we'll just not do anything.
Thank you. While we're touching on Spendles, I've got a few questions, as you're not probably won't be surprised to hear. They're not around the investigation carried out by the Chief Executive. I'm looking at it outside of that, more from a cabinet perspective. Because, as I say, I know Peter wasn't here, so he's probably missed that report, but there was quite an in-depth report, and Ian came along and spent quite a bit of time asking questions. But I sort of followed the timeline. As you know, I've been concerned about Spendles for quite some time and raised it on numerous occasions. The first question, as I say, I'll follow through the timeline. On the 8th of February 2024, the oversights came to light. That's recorded in the all members briefing of the 26th of April 25 and a report to this cabinet on the 14th of April 25. Then on the 13th of February, yourself gave the full council the general fund and budget speech, said Spendles was was having a favourable impact on the council's finances. Again, it's in the document page 105. Now, I think it's safe to say that when you made that statement, you were unaware of what was going on, or you wouldn't have made that statement. And that's backed up by the fact that end of February 24, corporate director and portfolio holder advised of the expenditure issues. They immediately commenced a review of issues and took action. Now, this is in the written response to this committee's questions, and it's also confirmed by Councillor Baker at the 24th of May cabinet meeting. So my question is, and it may not be a question that you can answer, but I think it's a question that needs answering. The oversights came to light on the 8th of February, but the cabinet didn't know about it until the end of February. And I think the question is why? So, as I say, I don't think it can be answered here and now, because if there was an answer, it would probably have been in the report or whatever, but I can't. Can you see what I'm saying? there seems to be an approximate 2-week window when it was known to some, but not the Cabinet.
I must admit, I'm sitting there looking at what we answered last time. You know, I feel like all of this has been answered, and
It hasn't been answered.
okay, well, you know, if there is something in there, then I'll get you a written answer, Paul. It's
Yeah,
you know,
I've looked through.
I've just, to be honest, you know, we're going backwards and forwards on who knew what when, you know, and this has all been finished, done, dusted.
I'll be blunt, Mark.
And it's
we tried to
2
deal
weeks
with
in
this at one
February.
meeting, but unfortunately you were unable to attend, so it's had to be split over two. We've dealt with the officer side, but the Cabinet side hasn't been touched on, and Ian wasn't in the position to touch on it.
Appendix C says different. You know, Appendix C is very much the same questions you've just asked.
So you should.
So if there's one part in there, I mean, I have apologised because I slightly got it wrong. I think you'll find it in there somewhere. You know, but for me, it's like, what is it you're trying to do? You know, what is it you're trying to achieve under this scrutiny?
I'm trying to achieve is, for example, if it happens to Carnarvon Road and you, the Cabinet, aren't told, that's not right. It's happened here. How has that door been closed for your benefit?
Okay, well, as I heard the question, I haven't got an answer for you today. I said I'll get you a written answer, but you carried on.
That's it. Now, the next point was on the 4th of March, Councillor Baker discussed with the Corporate Director, and have been talking about ever since. We agree on that, fine. Can I ask, what action did the portfolio holder actually take?
Sorry, Chair, are we talking about the Monday the 4th of March? The conversation I had with my corporate director about what had happened or was going to happen?
No, I think you said on the 4th of March, you discussed it with the corporate director, and he'd been talking about it ever since, which is fair enough. You're going to raise it, but can I ask what action you actually took as a Cabinet or a portfolio holder?
As far as I can recall, the conversation I had with the corporate director, and obviously bearing in mind I came in front of this committee the following day and said there was possibly a delay. I can't recall the complete conversation, but it would have been on the lines of, what do we know? What are we going to do? How is it going to be done? When I informed Cabinet, I can't say. I would probably have had the conversation with the leader and said, there's a potential issue, but I don't know what it is at that time. Yes, there was going to be an overspend. Yes, there'd been a theft. Yes, we were delayed. But what all that was, until we got the full report in May, because that's when we knew exactly what the cost was. So I wasn't going to mislead this committee. I wasn't going to mislead Cabinet, and I definitely wasn't going to mislead Council, because that would be wrong for me to guess or make any statement saying, do you know what, this is going to cost us hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds without knowing the exact figures, if you like, and exactly what had gone wrong. That took some time to put together, and obviously officers were doing that in the background. Like I've said on more than one occasion, at Cabinet and at this committee, I have a weekly meeting with my corporate director and the Director of Planning and Community to discuss things. Spendles was top of that agenda every single week, and I pressurise officers to say, to ask, I want to know, because if this is going to be a huge problem, then I want to be the first to know before I can take it to Cabinet. I think that's answered the question, Chair.
That's fine. So I think that's it from the timeline that I'd kept over the time. The only other comment I'd make, I know the Chief Executive has apologised for the error happening to this meeting in the past. He did it again on behalf of officers on the 14th of April, and he also said there's nothing wrong with saying we got it wrong. Throughout, the Cabinet has distanced itself from any kind of responsibility. Is that still the position?
I am happy on record to apologise for Cabinet.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything on Spendles before we move on? So, new item? Yeah, sorry. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Question or statement, I'll let the people in the room decide. This work project, this list of projects, developments, and all sorts of wonderful things. I have lived in tendering for 48 years, which coincidentally is about how long I've been alive. I have never seen so many seriously exciting, seriously adventurous, and seriously beneficial projects in my life, all happening in one time period. This is amazing, and I really do feel the Cabinet should be commended for the work that they're doing. So many diverse, so many projects. I will invite the Cabinet in its entirety to Manningtree one day to come and have a picnic on the beach, just so that you all know it exists. But just to bring it back into a question, can I ask the panel if you'd agree with my statement?
I'm happy to agree with that. In fact, when I did the same piece of work, it's over £60 million of projects in there, and there's 50 projects in total. 54 I counted when I went through them, and you just don't realise how much is actually going on. And we were taking stock the other day about what we've managed to do in the last 2 years, and I've mentioned a few of the projects that we've delivered. And I think something that needs to also be remembered is that we're still doing the business as usual. We're still dealing with devolution. We're still dealing with local government reform. We're still doing the civic stuff. Portfolio holders are going out to them. And we're still doing the outside bodies. This was a lot before I even mentioned any of that. So I think we're doing a huge amount, and I'm always happy to be scrutinised on it. It keeps us true. We're transparent with it. But I think this council is doing a huge amount of stuff, and I am extremely proud of it when I go into rooms with other leaders in Essex, and they can't even sit around the same table to discuss LGR, when they can't sit there and decide how many unitaries they're going to, and tendering is always forging ahead, and most of our officers are leading the groups. So I'll take those compliments. Thank you very much.
Switch to Mark, then Peter.
I was going to say, I mean, my comments follow a little bit on from what Matthew's just said. I mean, I sit here and notice a few things because at the moment I'm now thinking, perhaps legacy and things like that as we wind tendering up. But I mean, there's a project that's going to go ahead for Walton, and the funding's come in on the 27th of June 2025, for the play zones, etc. And I mean, I also look over that we've done the air handling units at Walton Swimming Pool. Are we still going to be looking for new sources of funding, as we're winding the council up? And if we do get that funding, I mean, realistically, I mean, there are a huge amount of projects there to complete, but I think we should still be looking for funding. But how do we ensure that that funding remains in tendering and doesn't end up, being passed out to a new unitary and go out of the area? Can we look at partnership organisations taking on some of these projects so that we can keep the funding here if we're not going to complete the projects ourselves?
Are we taking on more? So capacity, it's one of those big things. It was always been my mantra to deliver more capacity into the organisation, to deliver some of the projects, and you've seen us do Spendles and Honeycroft, and we've pushed things through. And I put the PDU unit in to help deliver the LUF and the CRP2. monitor officer once told me, be careful about taking on funding because it's just a big enough risk not delivering it. So, and that was very good advice. So when we take on funding, we have to make sure it meets our core priorities. You know, we have to make sure we have capacity, you know, and that we are going to deliver it in a certain timescale. Now, if you're saying to me what's going to happen at LGR, that's a bit crystal ball. You know, I don't think anybody can tell you what will happen with LGR. We're obviously very good at partnership working, and we are already working with who we anticipate being the councils that will form our new unitary. We're in early stages yet. I think there's still some work to be done around what goes forward, what doesn't, and that's for the leaders. But there's a whole process that slowly takes power away from this council and gives it to the new unitary, and that would be a conversation for another time. And that's one of the things I think, you know, this scrutiny committee should be looking at is how LGR affects this council and going forward.
Ian?
If I may just add to that, just Councillor Cousins, just to answer a question which you asked about isolating funding to individual areas. When we get funding, it is usually for very specific projects. So it's about actually making sure the scoping of the funding which we get and the grant is identified for very specific. And it's usually not tendering wide, it's usually for something very specific. The swimming pool covers is a good example. The various different things, so it's specific. And I think that that's going to be really important between now and 2028. So I think you're on the money there, literally, in terms of saying that we need to make sure that where we are getting funding, we are specific. In terms of your other question, I think there is, as you know, an element of working at a local level also, as whereas there's local projects, local transfer, local opportunities. We cannot asset strip, as we've discussed and I've said here previously. However, we can have a look and say where things can be better managed or better focused at a local level. And we're doing a number of that work. I've spoken to every town council and also via TDOUT to every parish council who could attend and the opportunities. We've also spoken to external groups. We've been along to the Harris Society, for example, been to a number of other groups who have expressed an interest around those. So you're right, there is a lot of work between now and LGR of not only the massive amount of work for LGR, but also at a local level, what is possible, the art of the possible, and it's not always possible, what's the possible to also do at a local level.
I think Lisa wants to come in and then back to Mark.
I know this evening that I'm sitting with the chairman and the committee supporting you, but if I was there as the monitoring officer attending this meeting, what I would say is that, as identified when we were talking about the waste contract earlier, as was identified when we was talking about Carnarvon Terrace, some of these on this list still require further decisions. They still require further decisions to continue. They still require further decisions for funding. They still require further decisions in light of local government reorganisation. So what I want to do is, I get the feeling in the room that everyone's proud of this long list, but some of them say they're completed and some we still require a lot of work to be done. And I just want to make that point that it's, so we're quite clear around that in relation to what can be delivered in the time we have available.
Well, following up on Ian's comments then, is it, I mean, because I see TDC doing a very, very good job at levering money in for projects, you know, very recent money. Is there any money available to help us work with town and parish councils to do some of the work that we might want to do to ensure that we do leave a legacy when this council ends? I mean, is there funding out there to help us build those partnerships with maybe not just town and parish councils, but maybe other organisations that could help complete those projects?
happy. I'm very happy to. So it depends on the project. I mean, you know, there were some specifics where there's potential for step-down funding for looking at those. There's others which actually are going to be more around what is it better at the local level, or it may be something which is already being managed locally by a lease or whatever, and is it better to be transferred, because whilst assets are known as assets, some of our assets are actually liabilities, because they cost us money, they don't make us money, and they don't, you know, that. So it's going to be a mixture, if I'm honest, Councillor Cousins. It's going to be a mixture of some of those, yes, so, but whatever we do, it's still going to take capacity of the organisation to do it, and therefore we will be putting some capacity in, and we're putting capacity in because as part of it, and you will see in the outturn for the budget, we're looking for an additional capacity in around LGR. Well, some of that changes will be around, from that LGR funding, will be about what do we do in the transfer, and what stays with the organisation and what is better managed locally. So there is, if you look at that, there is the potential for some, but for some actually probably won't need that. It will be around capacity to do it rather than the fund, rather than capacity to work on around the town council, for example.
Back to Peter.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you very much to our monitoring officer, Mrs. Hastings, for stealing my thunder, because I don't agree with Councillor Bensalim at all, or perhaps some of it, in terms of the statement that he made that he's proud of everything that's contained in this document. And, you know, if I flick through, you know, we've got Wheelie council offices with a decision still to be made on that, hopefully later this month, but I don't know. That's remained empty for, you know, over 5 years, I believe, at a cost of over 300,000, maybe 350,000 pounds to rate to our residents. And then we flick through it, and then we see the garden community, and whilst, you know, there's still lots of questions there, the thing that fills me for dread is the recent, I think it was announced yesterday, certainly this week, the government announced that they're cancelling the widening of the A12. That's going to be an enormous one. Now, it's not something that this council here have any direct control over, but, you know, our residents will be deeply concerned that there's going to be lots of building, lots of residents, and yet the A12, which I travel down, up and down most days, is blooming awful, and that's going to be, you know, the recent consultation for the local plan, you know, infrastructure was pretty much one of the highest things that people complained about. And then we look at the local plan review itself. I don't think many residents are going to be very happy with the fact that we've been mandated to double the amount of houses that we're being built, that's going to build and concrete over, you know, lots and lots of our green fields and destroy village life for many of them. So I don't agree that everything is rosy and happy in this report. I do accept that there are many things in this report that are things to be proud of, and hopefully things that will come to fruition. I accept that, but not everything. Come on, we're kidding ourselves if we say that everything in there is rosy.
Would anyone like to respond? Mark?
Absolutely. It wasn't a question, but a couple of bits. You are right. It's coming to Cabinet, Wheelie, this month. So we'll be discussing it on Friday, and then in ICAB, and then 2 weeks from there, a decision will be made. As for the garden communities, we know about the road. We're at the LGA conference. We listened to Angela Rayner there. She made various overtures, which we capitalised on, and we've actually used the A12 as that. And so we've written to her, asking, you know, can she sort the road out and everything else. So whilst you mentioned a lot of national things, I think this was our project list, and whilst any number of national things can come in and derail any project, you know, I think when I was saying it's a great project list, I was talking about us as a council and how we're delivering. And yes, some things may have gone, but you mentioned 5 years for Wheelie. Just wanted to point out we've only been around for 2.
Does anyone else have any questions? Graham?
It was just a comment, really, and I think that, you know, we had some good debates and obviously good opinions and that. But I always think that when we focus on problems, you'll find more problems. But when we focus on solutions, we will see more opportunities. And I think that possibly, whilst this might not be perfect, we should be looking to get spin-offs from this. You know, the projects might not be in the form that's on here, and we might have to cut back because of various budget constraints. So I think, but then again, you know, as I say, you know, just to prove that I do go to training on scrutiny. One of the biggest strap line, one of the best strap lines on one of the many I've attended. Sometimes the risk is not taking a risk, and I think obviously there have been risks here, and we've come unstuck on a couple of things. But I think maybe if we hadn't have taken that, then we've learned things along the way, haven't we? So hopefully it's going to improve us as an organisation. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Mark, would you like to say anything at the end?
I think I'd already summed up halfway through halfway through, and I thought we got to the end. So I was just pointing out and to echo the monitor officer's comments, the sheer amount of work that we do and still have to do. You know, I talked about the business as usual, the devolution, LGRs, the civic parts that we have to do in the outside bodies. Not to mention there are some, as the monitor officer says, some really big stuff that still needs to be delivered, and lots of decisions and financing and governance to be done. So happy to turn up again, not too quickly. Give us a chance to get some more of these under the belt, and we can go through them again.
Okay, I'd like to thank you. Ian, would you like to say anything to finish?
I just kind of actually want to come back to Councillor Cousins' point, and I think it's an important one, that we will continue to work with organisations going into LGR and about how we work on that, because I think that's just going to be so important, and that is part of the going forward.
Okay, with that, we'll take a 2 or 3 minute break, and then we'll resume our deliberations. So thank you all for coming along this evening, and safe journey home.
Thank you, Chairman.
Chair, if I may, I mean, we spoke about the projects, and I think one of the main things that we focused on was risk. So I think it certainly we need to put in the recommendation about the the risk assessment for these projects to find that which ones, the ones that primarily are not by this new unit, which looks after the bigger projects, which Officer Healy spoke about earlier. And it's how do we assess the risk of the smaller projects, which when they add up are significant anyway. So I think, you know, training or reminding of the officers, sorry, the portfolio holders and the cabinet's responsibilities in terms of managing these projects on an ongoing basis.
Graham, you look like you were going to say something. Does anyone else have any comments? So,
there is one comment actually, which I'm sure we haven't got the guys here that we could ask actually. Is there any cost element to this new unit? So when they get involved in it, that there's actually more cost to the council? I know the cost, if the, so there's not, so there's no additional cost.
The cost that was allocated to the unit was for a period of time, as opposed to individual projects. So from memory, I think they were a sum of money was allocated, say, for 2 or 3 years. So it's a lot got to come within that budget. But as I think Ian Davidson said, they have looked at other projects as well, but it's been ad hoc, you know, so they are mainly looking at the capital delivery projects. So for example, I've used the contract and procurement lawyer in that team to assist with the in-house legal team because we had an issue on capacity for a period of time. So, but it's ad hoc. There's no real sort of risk assessment as you referred to earlier.
So who are the decision makers for this? Is there some kind of criteria that will trigger it? Because one of the things we noticed was someone asked the question, would spindles have been come under this monitoring? And it was like, well, we don't know. Well, imagine we started spindles today. The answer would have been yes or no, it would have come under this because of the cost or the length of contract or whatever. Do you see where I'm going?
There is no formal process at the moment. I think it's fair to say. You know, I assume if there was a new capital delivery project, which Spendles was a capital delivery project, you'd ask the capital delivery team to take it on board. But, you know, that could be a recommendation from the committee if you were concerned about that, you know, how is that process undertaken?
Does anyone else have any other thoughts?
Just really, can we progress to making our recommendation? We've debated, we've deliberated, we've spent plenty of time going around it. Let's do it.
Okay, what have we got then, Lisa?
So for the purposes of the live stream, I will explain that the committee did retire and discussed these matters. Just referring to Councillor Ben Silliam's comment, so they did discuss what they wanted to make recommendations on, and I have with my assistants prepared some written recommendations for you to consider if they're the ones that you wish to move and second. So first recommendation, that due to the reliance of the project delivery unit for the larger capital delivery projects, how are the PDU projects being managed and risk assessed. You may wish to add and to give due consideration to whether the PDU could take on more of the projects, as there's no formal process. Cabinet members to be reminded of their roles and responsibilities on managing projects, budget controls and risk assessments. And thirdly, to give due consideration to this risk management in relation to individual projects and also the totality of what Cabinet is seeking to achieve.
Peter?
Could we consider adding, I know that Officer Healy spoke about the criteria, but could we get a definitive written criteria of what comes under the PDU unit currently, and request that Cabinet consider widening that scope to include more projects?
Either that, or is it to set a criteria for something to come under it? So what you would have, if it reaches a certain criteria, it's automatically covered by it. And then you could have an option that if a cabinet member wants it added, they could have it added.
Well, I think that's what obviously Healy said. There is a criteria, but it was largely around funding, where that funding for the project came from. So I think that I just want to get that in writing where it is, and then, as you said, you know, give scope to widen it, and if a cabinet member wants something, the cabinet can say no. I know it falls outside the criteria, but we still want it to go in for whatever reason.
So I would suggest adding a second recommendation, that the criteria for projects within the PDU currently depends solely on its funding source. Cabinet to give due consideration to the remit of the PDU being expanded and to set a criteria for doing so.
One more thing. Do we have a process in place for when a project is found to be or suspected to be overspending or above limit? What is the process for alerting cabinet members, portfolio holder, cabinet, the full council, and scrutiny? Perhaps is there a process for that currently?
Yes. So all cost centre codes within the council have got an allocated budget holder who is responsible, and what those officers are responsible for doing is basically managing those budgets within what they've been given. You cannot go beyond that budget. That's unlawful expenditure. We've been through that before. So what you would need to do is you would need to flag it up with your corporate director and portfolio holder and discuss what you could foresee was happening, not once it's happened, if you can foresee it, and then raise it with the Section 151, and the Section 51 will give advice as to how it could be resolved, but ultimately it requires decision. So that is the process. But again, you need people to follow it.
Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. I propose that we move our recommendations as read out by Lisa Hastings.
Do I have a seconder? Peter? Are we all happy with that?
Who seconded?
Chair, for clarity purposes, can we just hear it once again as to what I think we may have added a few things from when you originally read it out. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put my glasses on this time. Recommendation, first one. Due to the reliance of the PD project delivery unit for larger capital delivery projects, how the Cabinet should consider how non-PDU projects are being managed and risk assessed. Second recommendation, the criteria for projects within the PDU currently depends upon its funding source. Cabinet to consider expanding the role of the PDU and setting a criteria. Third recommendation, Cabinet members to be reminded of their roles and responsibilities of managing projects, budget controls and risk assessments. And finally, give due consideration to the risk management in relation to not only individual projects, but the totality of what Cabinet are seeking to achieve.
Can I just add one thing? I know we spoke about the PD unit and the criteria, but can we just say that we require a written explanation as to exactly what the criteria is currently? I know we talk about funding, but what is that? You know, is there a limit on it? Is there? I think if they put it in writing as to what it is, there'll be a clear understanding of that.
I've included after depends within the PDU currently depends upon its funding source, but request Cabinet to clarify the position.
We've got the same proposer and seconder? Yep. And everybody happy with that now? Okay. Oh, that's unanimous then. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you for putting the time in this evening, and I wish you a safe journey home.